So I showed you some ideas and some tools to solve problems and to debug your applications. And so now it's your turn to put all of that into practice on your own. And so here is your coding challenge for this section. So given an array of forecasted maximum temperatures, the thermometer that we've been working about throughout this section should display a string with these forecasted temperatures. So for example, if we have this array, which is our first test data here, then the string that it will print should be this. So 3 dots, then 17 degrees Celsius in 1 days. So that's the 17 here. Then again, 3 dots, then 21 degrees Celsius in 2 days. So this 21 is this 21, and then 3 dots, 23 degrees in 3 days. So in 1, 2, and 3 days, and then again 3 dots. Okay, and here you don't need to use this exact sign if you can't find it on your keyboard. I know it was a bit hard to find for me. So what you should do is to create a function called printForecast, which takes in an array called R, and then logs a string just like this one here to the console. Okay? And call this function for these two test values. And to solve this, you can use the problem-solving framework that we have just been talking about in this section. So try to understand the problem first by asking the right questions, and then break it into sub-problems. And I'm not saying that this is going to be easy. And for me, the main goal is not even that you achieve the result, but really that you start thinking about the problem and that you try as good as possible to break it up into sub-problems. And of course, there are many ways of asking the right questions and of breaking this up into sub-problems. So there's no hard ways of doing this stuff. So just try your best, take all the time that you need, and I will see you here once you're ready. Okay, so let me show you how I would have done it. And let's just close this terminal here, because remember that this live connection actually keeps running without the terminal opened. So let's just grab from up here this here. So as you see, I'm a little bit lazy. I don't like to type so much. So I just keep reusing stuff. So we need to understand the problem first. So let's look at that example string here. And so one part of the problem is definitely that this array here was basically broken up in 3 pieces, and then the separator is these 3 dots. Let's write that here. Array transformed to string separated by 3 dots. Then we can also ask what these numbers here are. So we already know that these here are of course coming from the array. But what is this? So 1 days, 2 days, and 3 days. So what is the X days? And the answer to that is that basically it is the current index of the array plus 1. So it would be weird to say that 17 degrees in 0 days, because this is a forecast. And so this is for the next day, and then in 2 days, and in 3 days. So answer index plus 1. Okay, so I think we understood the problem now, because I think that it's quite simple in this case. So let's now break this up into sub-problems. And I would say that the main problem here will be to transform this array into a string. Because that's essentially what we will have to do. Also, each of these elements here will be transformed to a string with these degrees Celsius. So let's just transform each element to string the Celsius. And I don't even remember where this is, so I'm just copying it here. Then we also need to account for the current day. So string needs to contain day. And again, that is the index plus 1. And finally, we also need to add the 3 dots between elements and start and end of string. So that looks like a lot of work, but actually it is not as hard as it looks from here. So let's start by creating 2 arrays here. So for test data 1 and 2, actually grab all of this in one go. Data 2. All right. And now let's tackle these problems here. Okay. So if the string would always have the same length, so if it would always just be 3 days, then it would be very simple. We could just basically hard code the string, right? We could just do something like data 1 at position 0, and then the degrees Celsius, then dot, 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 and so on and so forth, right? So here I'm missing these, of course. So we could do this, and there's still some value in first actually trying to write this. So this is how it would look like. Data 0 and 1 and 2. And let's indeed log this to the console. Give it a save. And so actually already the string looks exactly what we had here, right? But of course, this is not the way to go. Because then here in data 2, we have a longer array. And we want to write one function that works for all the arrays. So that print forecast. And so of course we need a more dynamic way of creating this string. But still, as I said, there is some value in having done that because it will help us figure out how we can arrive at a solution. So print forecast is a function which takes in an array R. And now let's see what we have to do. So if we have an array and we have to do multiple operations on it, we will, as always, use a loop. So let's start with that baseline. So let I equal 0, and this part is now always the same. So I less than R dot length and I plus plus. Okay, but now what are we gonna do? So how will we basically transform the array into a string? And there are so many ways in which we could achieve this, and actually in which we could solve this whole problem here, especially if you did some research to arrive at the solution here. But I will just go with a solution using the tools that we already used. So remember what we did when we calculated the average of a number. We started by adding all the values of the array using a loop, right? And we kept adding them to an accumulator variable that was called sum, right? So just to illustrate, that sum started at 0, and let's say we had an array of 2, 3, 4. And so in the first iteration, that sum was then updated to 2. Then in the second iteration, it was updated to 2 plus 3 equals 5. And then in the last iteration, it was updated to 5, which was the current sum, plus 4 equal 9. And so that's how we end up with the sum of all of these values. And now with the string, we can actually do the exact same thing. So here we will also have an accumulator variable essentially, which is going to be called string. So let's string, and instead of starting with 0, we will start with the equivalent of 0, but for strings, which is the empty string. So empty string has nothing. And then in each iteration, we will simply add to that string the current value of the array. So let's do that. String equals the current value of string plus array at the current position. And also let's already add this symbol here. And for that, let's wrap this here into a template literal. And so I'm selecting this, and then I can just hit the template literal, the backtick once, and it will wrap all of that. So then this, and then the degrees Celsius. And now all we need to do is to log that string to the console. So just as was asked, which takes and logs the string to the console. So we could have added that actually as one subproblem, even though it's a really, really small one. Log string to console. And so let's give it a try now. I'm saving. And nothing happened. Oh, that's because we didn't call the function. So let's print forecast with data1. And here we go. So 17 degrees, 21 degrees, 23 degrees. And that already starts looking like what we have here. So essentially, we already completed the most difficult part, so of transforming the array into a string. And again, this was similar to adding multiple numbers into one bigger number. Here what we did was to add multiple strings to a bigger string that kept growing after each iteration. And if you want to make sure to really understand this, then you can always use the debugger and go through this loop step by step and see this string variable here growing as the loop goes on and on. So we already did this part also, and this part. Now let's tackle this one. So it needs to also contain the day. So what does that look like? So 23 degrees in 3 days. So in 1 day, 2 days, and 3 days. So that's not too hard. So in, and now we already understood that this had to be the current index plus 1. So the current index is I plus 1. So in 1 days. So in the first iteration, it's going to be 0 plus 1, then 1 plus 1, and then 2 plus 1. Give it a save. And that's starting to look really close to what we need in the end. But now we are missing the separator dots. So how do you think we can achieve those? Well, in fact, these dots are simply something that repeat after each of these strings here, right? So we have this value and then dot, dot, dot. So we have the value dot, dot, dot. We just need one more space here to create this nice separation that we have. And so now we're almost done. Okay, so actually this is not correct here because it's missing the in 1 days, in 2 days, and so on and so forth. But let's just compare it here with the original. And so all that is left is these 3 dots at the beginning. And so we can just add them at the end. So we cannot put them here, right? Because then we would have too many dots. So that's a lot of dots, and that's not what we were looking for. So instead, we keep it like this, and then as we log it to the console, we simply add the dots here at the beginning. So dot, 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 plus the string, give it a save, and yes, that's the solution of our problem. Great. We can just improve this here a little bit again by using the plus equal operator, and then get rid of this part, make it a little bit more short and more efficient maybe. And so, yeah, that's it. That's the result of this coding challenge. And again, you could have done it in so many different ways, but what I really wanted you to achieve was to understand the problem and to break it up into small subproblems. If you did that, well, then my goal with this whole section, I would say, is achieved. So, hope you liked this one, even though it was a little bit more theoretical, but I think it's important to also have a section like this in a big web development course, because soft skills like the ones that I just showed you are also very, very important for your success.